Thank you, Jeffrey, for giving us your time today to share your personal life journey.
You're welcome.
So, you had a near-death experience 26 years ago, um,
Yes.
and you lost two very important people in your family.
Yeah.
Are you able to share that moment?
Yeah. The near-death experience was a result of a terrible automobile accident, and the whole family was in the car. Um, I sustained several life-threatening injuries. I mean, both my legs were crushed. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back was broken in two places. My right arm was almost ripped off. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. And then the seatbelt had cut through and ruptured all my insides. But as you mentioned, the most devastating part of that was my wife and my youngest son were killed instantly in the accident. So me and my older son survived. He was only 7 years old at the time, and I suppose I died too because that was the near-death experience with all those injuries and with all that trauma. My spirit left my body, and I had some pretty profound experiences around that.
So, you went to the other side. Are
Yes.
you able to share what you saw on the other side or experienced?
Yes. It was interesting at the scene of the accident, and I can't even, there aren't even words to describe. I was aware that both my wife and my youngest son were gone. I knew that. I was conscious of that. I knew my oldest son, Spencer, he was crying. I knew he was okay, but I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. I was losing consciousness. I had extensive injuries, but it was in that trauma that light came. And at the scene of the accident, it felt like a bubble of light. It's like light surrounded me, it comforted me. It's as if I began to rise above the accident scene within this light. Suddenly, in that light, I could breathe. The pain was gone. In fact, I had the thought, how can I possibly be okay? Suddenly I was still aware of all the trauma and all the grief of what had happened, but it's like suddenly I could breathe. The pain was gone, and this light was so comforting. And then in the light, like this bubble of light, suddenly my wife, who I knew was deceased at the accident, she was in the light with me. And she was radiant. But she began to communicate that I could not stay there. I had to go back. We had this conversation that if I stayed there, our oldest son, who survived the accident, would be orphaned. And we literally had the conversation and made a deal that I would come back, that I would come back and raise our son. Now it's interesting because it felt so physical. I mean, there she was. I could hold her. There was tears. She was upset. The odd thing is I was comforting her, but I was the one coming back out of the light. But it's as if everything was intensified. It's as if the emotions and the feelings were calmer, but I could taste her tears. I mean, everything was so connected. It was a profound connected experience. And that even increased because as we made the agreement, we made the deal that I would come back. I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And I didn't have to figure out how to come back. It was just the thought, just the intention. I'm going back. It was like, it was like I was suddenly I was out of this bubble of light, and I found myself moving about a very busy emergency room, level one trauma center, hospital. Now, I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. I later found out people arrived at the scene, emergency services were called, a devastating accident scene. My 7-year-old son was banged up pretty good, but he basically walked away with all my injuries and what had happened. I had to be extricated from the car and then airlifted or life flighted to the nearest level one trauma center. I didn't know that. All I knew is I'd crashed the car. We'd lost half our family. I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And then here I was moving about this hospital, this level one trauma center. But when I talk about the awareness, as I'm moving through the hospital, it's like I have 360 degrees awareness of everyone, all the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of the patients, and everyone I encounter, or everyone that I'm aware of, I know them perfectly. I know I it's like they're me and I'm them. There is this connectedness, there's this oneness. And I know their love, their hate, their motivations, their decisions. I connect. For instance, a nurse passed by me, completely unaware of me. Of course, I'll get to the story. This is my spirit. This is my soul. I'm not in the body at this point. It is my soul that's moving about the hospital. Nurse passes by, and in an instant, I know everything about her. In fact, I feel her life. I am aware of and almost experience the abuse that she went through as a child. And it's heartbreaking, but there's no judgment. And yet in that same instant that I feel all that, I see her in her magnificence. I'm like, wow, and here she is, healing, helping, working in a hospital. And that was true of everyone I encountered. I knew them, I felt them, I was connected to them. And then I finally came up to a body that I didn't feel anything from, which was odd. So I stepped closer and looked. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, that's me. But it wasn't me. That was my body. I mean, I was having this profound connected experience, but there was my body. There was my flesh. I mean, I was in such rough shape, so broken up. And there was a sadness. I had a sadness as I looked at my body. I'm like, wow, I never realized. I took it for granted. I didn't realize that I didn't have to remind my heart to beat. I didn't have to tell my lungs to breathe. I didn't have to teach my eyes to see. I mean, there was this profound reverence for the miraculous machine and miracle the body is. And yet mine was so broken, and I knew I had to get back in it. I knew I had to get back in because I'd made this deal that I was going to raise this child. And boy, going back in the body was rough. And again, I didn't have to figure out how. It was the intention. It was like, okay, I'm going back in. But then, boom, I mean, oh, all the grief, the pain, the trauma, the regret, the guilt. I just kept thinking, what happened? Can't I have those 3 seconds back in this car crash? How did I lose control of the car? And I was ventilated. They had a big tube down my throat doing all the breathing from my lungs. My legs having been crushed and the left one amputated, they were immobile. My right arm, because the shoulder was so torn out, was immobile. And they eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. And I learned a whole new meaning of the term "be still." I had no choice. I mean, there I was just wallowing in not only the physical trauma, but the emotional trauma was far worse. The grief and the regret of my wife and youngest son, and even worrying about my 7-year-old. Would he be okay? And and the fact that I was driving the car, it was really difficult.
You mentioned in one of your interviews it took you quite a long time to, I guess, heal.
It did. It took, well, I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. There was 18 surgeries attempting to put me back together. And there was complications. I mean, the infections were so intense, and then I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. I mean, I was in ICU for months. And yeah, it was a traumatic, horrible experience in the hospital. However, the doctors and the nurses were amazing. Um, there was a particular doctor, the attending physician at this level 1 trauma center. He had a profound experience as his team was working on my body in the operating room. And he shares this, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He came into the operating room and he recounts that he literally saw my wife's spirit, this, apparition of a woman standing above my body in the air. And he says that he communicated with her, not verbally, but telepathy. And she simply shared with him how grateful she was for he and the team saving my life, which I found was profound. When he recounted that to me, he didn't know that I'd made a deal to come back. He had no idea that I had had an experience at all. And this was quite early on, and he felt compelled that perhaps he should share that with me. But yes, I was in the hospital for a very long time. I came out. There was the colostomy bag because of the rupturing of the intestines. I was in a wheelchair. My right leg was in a brace because they had to completely rebuild the knee. I've still got 6 pins and a plate in it today holding it together. The left leg was amputated off. I couldn't use my right arm. Um, Eventually, all of that was taken down. I was eventually fitted with a prosthetic limb. But yeah, I didn't talk about my experience for almost a decade. Only very close family members knew what had happened. And there was profound things that happened in the hospital. The experience at the scene of the accident and coming into the hospital is only part of it. I mean, I was in and out of my body while in the hospital, with all the complications. I had a profound experience at the end of my hospital stay, which may have been the most profound. And in that experience, I left my body again. The light came. I felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. But this time the light dispensed, like it went away. And I was in the most beautiful place. I mean, people say the spirit world, they say the other side, they say heaven. That the only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. And I was whole. I mean, it was such a physical experience. I had both legs, I had both feet. I began to run. And in running, I could literally feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my calves and my thighs. It was a profound physical experience. And as I was so joyfully running in what felt like a perfectly healed body, I got the message I wasn't there to stay. And at about that same time, there was this corridor off to the left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way, and I did. I began working down the corridor. But as I did, I saw at the end of the corridor a crib. Now, Griffin, my youngest son, who passed away in the accident, he was only 14 months old. He was still sleeping in a crib. So I was intrigued, and I raced to this crib, and when I looked in it, there he was. There was my little boy. There was Griffin, and he was perfect. He wasn't injured. And this was again so physical. As a father, I picked him up. I swept him up in my arms and held him. And I don't know if you've ever held a sleeping child or picked up a sleeping child. There's a weight, there's a heat to it. And I was aware of this. I'm like, wow, this is real. I could feel him solid against me. In fact, I could feel his breath on my neck. And I even leaned over and I smelled his hair. Yeah, I mean, it was I'm like, it's him. He's my boy. And I began to cry and weep. And I had this guilt as I was holding him. There was this intense presence behind me, this overwhelming presence that was coming closer and closer. And it was so cosmic and powerful and wise. And I'm holding my little boy, and the guilt began to bubble up in me. And I'm thinking, he's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut short because I lost control or overcorrected. this presence is coming closer and closer, and it was so overwhelming. I thought that's God, and I'm in trouble. My little boy's here because I crashed the car, and I was having these horrible guilt feelings as this presence came closer and closer, and I had this thought. I thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And with that thought, and this felt physical too, these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my little boy. And then it's like the lid just came off. It's like there was this melding. It's like, wow, my son became me. I became part of this divine being, the creator that was holding me. And suddenly there's just this download, this absolute download of peace, of love, of forgiveness. In fact, the first thought I had as I was having the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. The first thought was, there's nothing to forgive. Your life, everything's in divine order. And I thought, how can that be? And then my life began to unfold like watching a movie. I mean, I was seeing my life, and I was saying, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And this beautiful being that held me said, there's no mistakes. What did you learn from it? What did you learn? That was as I kept saying, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That was a mistake. It was just like, but what did you learn? What did you learn? And so I'm looking at my life in a different way. I even saw things and I said, well, that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong. And I did it anyway. And the creator that held me said, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. Um, you're as precious and beloved as the child you hold. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew that rippled out to everyone. There was so much love, and there was no judgment, just love and peace and a comprehension of life and his experience and the experiences I had had in a different way. And I learned about choice. I mean, the being that held me said, you can be mad at God your whole life because this was allowed to happen, or because the car crashed. Or you can make a different choice. You can beat yourself up for the rest of your life because you were driving the car. But I was given a choice that I could choose, that I could give my son back. I could hand him over. And it was interesting because as I was in these arms, it was communicated to me that God gave me the choice to have my will. I was told, I want you to have your will. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's God's will. It's not my will be done. It's like, and I said, no, it's your will. And there was so much love. This God, if you will, that held me said, no, my will is your will. That's how much you're loved. My will is that you have free will, that you get to choose. And in all that peace and all that beauty and all that love, I made a choice. I kissed my little boy and I gave him back. I handed him over. I trusted. And in all that love and beauty, that there was no other choice to make. It's like, wow, this is it. And as I did that, I came to myself back in the hospital, to all the injuries and everything else, but I had a little different perspective. And yet I didn't share that with anybody for so long. I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I I didn't want people to think that I thought maybe I was special. It was a special experience. And I just had a hard time. It was almost like it was too sacred. It wasn't something you talk about over lunch. It's like, I just don't know if this is something I can talk about. And I talk about it now quite openly, but it's been over 2 decades. And I've also found that in sharing it, um, people benefit. In fact, I was never going to share the story. I had told very close friends and family members, and I was approached by a neighbor who she said, something happened to you, didn't it? And I said, yeah, but I don't talk about it. And she said, you're going to talk about it. I want you to tell me what happened. And she came over to the house and through tears, I said, here's what happened. And she said, you've got to talk to a friend of mine. He works at the university. They study these things. And I said, no, 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 I'm not going to talk about it. And she finally said, please go see this guy. And so she arranged for us to meet. And I told him about what had happened. And he was a researcher. He studied what happens to a Buddhist when they pass. And is it different than what might happen to someone who's Hindu or Christian or atheist or agnostic? And he just studied the similarities and all the differences as well. But when I shared what had happened to me with him, he said, you've got to come speak to our group. And I said, no, I don't want to talk about this. He said, no, no, some of them are in late stage cancer. Some of them have had loved ones pass. He said, there's even a group of goth, teens that are obsessed with death. He's like, come speak to our group. And I agreed to do that. And it wasn't a big group of people. There was probably 100 people there. But when I finished sharing what had happened, and still I was crying, a guy came up from the back of the room and he says, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, I own a publishing company and you're going to write a book. And he had already gotten my information, from the organizers of the event. That was a Friday night, and Monday, there was a book contract in my email. And I was really troubled about this. I didn't want to tell the story. I certainly didn't want it to be about me. But there was a strange way that all these things had just fallen into place. And so I actually went back to the scene of the accident. And I prayed. I said, God, I gave this speech and now there's a book contract in my email and I don't want to do this. And what am I supposed to do? Anyway, I got a profound answer. I don't profess to talk to God every day. Well, I talk. I don't always get answers like this, but I got a profound answer. And the answer came back in such a way, I call it that whisper that speaks to your heart. But I can quote it. I was told, share your experience and others will heal. And so I thought, well, it's not about me. Okay, maybe I can do that if it's about other people. And there was a huge barrier to that too. I mean, I had this fear or this anxiety around the fact that, well, gosh, what if there's a royalty check? Am I that guy? Would I collect money based on an experience that took half my family and I was driving the car? There was all kinds of things for me to push through. But I kept leaning into, well, others will heal. Others will heal. This was 10 years after the accident had happened that this all came about. And so I signed the contract. I began writing the book, and it was so difficult to revisit it all. But I thought, well, I mean, in the end, I thought I'll just write it as if I'm writing from my family, so they know exactly what happened. And I thought it doesn't matter. I thought my mom will buy a copy. That's about it. But the book released, and all of a sudden, in the first 10 days, it was number 3 on Amazon in the category, and there was just a flood of requests to come and lecture on the book, come and talk about the book, come and share your experience. And although it scared me to death, I did that. But it was the emails and the cards and the letters that came in where people had been touched or moved. One of the first was a little 3x5 card that came. It was jail mail. It's the cards they allow inmates to write on. And it was from a man that was in prison. And he had scribbled out on this little 3x5 card how he was guilty. He was in prison. He was serving his sentence, and he had lost his family too, not by death. They had left him and abandoned him. But he said, I read your book. And he said, somehow it reminded me that I'm better than the things I've done, and that I am loved at a divine level. And when, he wrote, he said, I'm going to come out of this place a much better man than I was going in it. And I mean, I even cried at that. I thought, well, there you have it. That's the guy I wrote the book for. That's the one. Share your experience and others will heal. So it's been a yes. I didn't talk about it for quite some time, and even when I did reluctantly. And then suddenly this floodgate opened, and I literally found myself all over the world talking about it. And a lot of people have read the book, and here I am talking to you, and it's like it's been 26 years. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should just be sitting on the porch and watching the birds, and yet I feel the message is important enough, and the message is of love. We are so loved. And if we could simply love each other more, the world would be a whole different place.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I think we
Um,
need this kind of messages more now than ever before. Um, so I have a question. Like you talk about free will, and then I hear a lot of people talking about, we pre-plan our lives before we come into this body. So in your, so what would you say it is? Is it free will, or is it pre-planned, or is it kind of both, hand in hand?
that's a great question. Free will or predestiny, boy, it is a dichotomy. Now, here's the interesting experience I had when I was in the arms of the divine. My first question was, why? Why, God, why? And I had this profound knowing, and it was that I had created it. God didn't do this to me, that I had created my experience. My soul wanted to expand. And for whatever reason, and I still question that. Well, why? But had to be an easier way, right? But I felt so much love. It was almost like, yes, you planned your life and all the players in it. Your wife Tamara loved you enough to leave, to pass away so young, and your son agreed to break your heart in ways you couldn't imagine, so that your heart would be open. And the entire universe loved me enough to support that. There was so much love. And I I used to believe as a child that life was a test, that life was a test, that the angels were keeping score, and I was certainly failing. I was certainly not doing well at the test. And I had those beliefs in the arms of God, and I'm thinking, but I failed the test. And what was communicated to me is life is not a test, it's a gift. It's a gift. And I'm like, wow, but so painful. Yes, and so joyful, but we have challenges and struggle. Yes, and you have peace and love. It's like everything had its opposites, and in those arms, everything was love. Everything is love. I saw my young life. This is a short story, but my parents divorced when I was young, which was devastating to me. There was all kinds of insecurities in me based on mom and dad, splitting up. But I became very interested in sports and athletics, and my big brother taught me how to play baseball. And gosh, I was all the age of 9, and he was probably 12, but I'm playing Little League Baseball. And he taught me how to hit and catch and throw. And I'm at the big game, and I actually hit the ball. So I start running the bases. And we'd never practiced with real like baseball bags. We just had the dirt patches. So I ran past first and I touched that bag, but I ran past second and I didn't touch the bag. I just ran through the dirt patch. And by the time I got to third, the base coach is saying, go back. You got to touch the bag. And I am all flustered, and I turn around and go touch the bag. Then I run to third. But by that time, they'd thrown the ball to third base and I was tagged out. And there's my big brother, 12 years old, standing there like, oh, man, man. So after the baseball game, he insists that I run the bases and touch every bag. And he's like, again, again. And as a 9-year old, I'm like, why is he so mean? Why is he humiliating me like this? And yet, in that realm, as I took a higher perspective at my life, when I say it's all love, I see that again. I see my big brother at the tender age of 12. And he wasn't being mean and he wasn't humiliating me. He loved me so much. He didn't want his little brother to ever mess up again. He's like, you touch every bag, do it again. And I felt the love he had for me as his little brother. And I also felt the weight he had as he was attempting to step into a father role in a divorce situation. And at the age of 12, there was so much love. In this realm, I thought it was mean and humiliating. In that realm, it's like, wow, he loved me that much as a little boy. And he was a kid too. We were children. And yet there was nothing but love.
Now, how can those who haven't had a near-death experience that blissfulness or connect with the other side?
And there's a lot of ways. You do not, I mean, you do not have to have a near-death experience to connect with a higher power or with something bigger than you are, or with the universe or God or the divine, whatever word you want to put on it. Um, there's several ways that I do it. I mean, this is what works for me. I wish I felt that connected every day. I don't. But if I can find 10 minutes where I can simply be still, and I like to go out on the porch or go out where I can be in nature, where I can smell the trees and see the grass and hear the birds, but just be still and just reconnect. Think about that higher power. Or here's an even simpler thing. Simply ask the question, whether you say it in your mind or whether you whisper it or if you say it out loud, just be still and say, what can I do for someone else today? And I promise that the ideas, I mean, you'll picture someone, you'll have a thought of someone, you'll know exactly what to do. It might be very simple, like it might just be call mom today. You haven't talked to mom in a week, and then do it, and then do it, and that seems to assist me in just staying connected, just hearing that whisper, just knowing. And somehow, if it's not about me, if I'm not sitting there saying, oh, please God, help me and give me this and give me that, and if I just make it not about me and just think, what can I do for somebody else, suddenly that flow happens. I've also done, and these may be indigenous, like indigenous spirituality practices, but it's called a sacred soul walk. And I mean, you literally, it's like a vision quest. Or, you go as far back in the recesses of to your earliest memory. Some people actually remember before they were born. There are people, when I was in those realms, I was eternal. There was no beginning or end. I was just, and some people go to before they were born, maybe the pre-planning stages. But if you literally meditate and go to the earliest memory you have, and then you literally walk through your life, this can take all day, but you stop at every major event, whether it's heartbreaking and challenging or whether it's joyful and beautiful, but you stop and you honor it and you process it and you be with it. It's not unlike a medicine wheel when you walk the medicine wheel. But as I did that process and worked with indigenous, elders and wisdom keepers and spirit keepers, it was like a life review. And they told me, they said the people who do this here, they don't have such a hard time with a life review when they leave this realm because they've already done it. They've already looked at their life. They've already self-evaluated. And I can emphasize that as I was in the arms of God looking at my life, there was no judgment from God at all. It was my judgment. It was not, it was what did I learn? How did I feel about it? And there was nothing but love in my experience for, well, what did you learn? Yeah, that was an interesting choice. but how did you grow? And I think that's how we can stay connected, is even just be in that mindset. It's a very long answer to a short question, but that's what works for me.
So it's very hard. Like, how do we see others? How do we see love in others? Like, just with everything that's happening in the world today, there's so much hate out there,
Mm.
division, it's how do we kind of find love in others or see others as love?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there is so much division. It seems like everything wants to divide us. I mean, everything from genders to political parties to race to religion and belief systems, even class systems. I mean, every. I mean, even in school, it's like you're graded and put in. Everything divides us. Everything seems to segment us, and yet my experience is that we're one. If there's a key to it, and there was a great teacher 2,000 years ago that said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And I was really good at loving my neighbor, but what I wasn't good at was loving myself. I think if there's a key, and I'm not talking about arrogant, pompous self love, I think the key is to love one's self truly. And as that unfolds, then the ability to love others comes because you realize that we're connected. You realize we're one. What I do to somebody else, I'm really doing to myself. If I'm hurting another, that only hurts me in the end. We're all connected. So self-love may be the key to healing the world.
But how do we
And
get there? Because a lot of us are don't feel worthy of loving ourselves, right? Like
oh yeah,
we'll
yeah,
do
this
things for
whole
other people, but when it comes to
yeah.
ourselves, we don't. So how do we get to that place?
Oh boy. I've had some interesting experiences. I've done a lot of work on this too. In my book, Knowing, I talk about this a little bit. And I'm sure the life review was a huge support as I looked at my life and I saw that little boy, the innocent boy, before everything in life had happened, before I decided that I wasn't smart enough or not good looking enough or not athletic enough or whatever. But there seems to be a key. Oddly enough, the same great teacher said, become as a little child. you know, Somehow when I envision myself as that little 3-year-old, that perfect little boy, the self love has a space to grow. And I can begin to let go of everything that's happened, all the choices, all the things that I've done or the things that have been done to me. And I can see the perfection um, in that little child. And that's that's a good thing. That works for me.
So, what is the most important life lesson you have learned in this life?
Wow. Forgiveness. Forgiveness, to forgive, to give as before, to let it go. And I'm not necessarily talking about forgiving others. There's plenty to forgive, but boy, the hardest person for me to forgive is this gray-haired guy right here. Um, but to forgive, to give as before, to let it go, to ask, what have I learned, and to be totally accountable in it. Well, I made that choice. I can see what I didn't see. I can see what I ignored. I can see what I assumed. I can see, what I denied in that. And therefore it's just like when God held me and say, yeah, but what did you learn? What did you learn? If I can lean into what I learned, then it's easier to let go and forgive.
Message would you want to give to someone who is, going through suffering and pain, like at this moment?
Keep breathing. I mean, keep breathing. Boy, I've been in it. We all have. We all get our turn to literally be neck deep in really difficult things. Keep breathing. It will get better. It will get better. And and do something for someone else. You know, again, if I do something for someone else, somehow it relieves the pain a little bit, relieves the pain a little bit. And be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Um, it's temporary. It's temporary. When I left the body and the joy and the peace, I was in the middle of a horrific, devastating accident. And suddenly everything was eternal. Everything was light. Everything was love. It's almost, and I'm not downplaying the challenges and the suffering we go through here, but it was almost like, oh, well, that's the stage, that's the movie, that's the video game, that's the, but the reality is that we're eternal and it's all for the expansion of our soul. And therefore, maybe we can take a higher perspective and look at it and keep breathing and get through it. I mean, it's so, I keep referring to Jesus. It just keeps coming up in this conversation. Jesus is going to be crucified. And he says, well, for this cause came I into the world. When I'm going through really challenging things and I've not been crucified, but I can say to myself, well, for this cause came I into the world. This is an experience my soul must have chosen to have so that I could love deeper and be more empathetic and perhaps have more compassion.
I heard that you did get married again, and you had it added two more sons to your family. So there's
Yes.
three sons in the family.
Yes.
So you had you can say happy ending, like it's a happily ever after. Or
Well, yes. Yeah, I've been very blessed. I've been blessed, but it's never over till it's over. I don't know if there is a happily ever after. There is right now.
really?
I can look through the past and there's so much pain, and
Mhm.
I can look into the future and there's so much worry, and then if I just focus on right now and if I'm joyful right now, then I guess that's happily ever after. But wow, if we're eternal, that can be mind-boggling. That would mean forever. Who can get their mind around forever? But if it's nothing more or nothing less than simply always having right now, then maybe that is a happily ever after. I mean, and the little things become the big things. People have said to me, "Oh, your life must have been spared for some great cause," and I'm like, "Yeah, so I can watch another sunset or see the blossoms come out in the spring or watch the snow fall in the winter." Um, those are miracles. Those are big miracles. We just take them for granted.
If people want to connect with you, Jeffrey, where can they find you?
The best place to find me is just through a website. I'm really not on social media. I've kind of gone reclusive. I'm living back on the farm and I talk to the horses more than I talk to people. But if you want to find me, go to Envoy Publishing, ENVOY publishing.com, and you get access to our books there. Knowing is my personal memoir, and then my oldest son Spencer, who's now a full-grown man, we just recently released a children's book titled "Where Are You?" And it's written from his perspective as a 7-year-old when half the family passed, and even his dad was changed forever. It's a sweet little book. We thought we were writing a children's book. Some guys fish or golf or work on cars. We wrote a book together. We thought it was a children's book, but it seems to have been embraced by anybody who misses somebody. Much to our surprise, it became an international #1 bestseller. We were shocked, but it's a beautiful little book, and we collaborated on that together. You can find all of those at Envoy Publishing, and there's a little navigation link there that says contact, and you can click that and write an email, and I literally read those myself. So that's how you can find me.
Well, thank you so much. And do you have any final message before we let you go?
Well, it's all a choice, I guess. You cannot choose what happens in life, but you can certainly choose how you navigate it, how you experience it.